My parents came literally from nothing when they came to Germany. We reached our first, almost 1 million users before we got our seed investment. Do not be discouraged by the first 5 no's. You'll probably get 20 or 30 no's before you get the first yes. It's just how life works. That's also necessary to build a great company. Figure out who you need to talk to that will understand your problem. The biggest factor of starting a company.
Hello and welcome to the Roots to the Start podcast. Today I have a very special guest with me, Mengting Bönsch, co-founder of Kitchen Stories, one of the most successful cooking platforms worldwide. Mengting has not only revolutionized the way we discover and cook, but she has also had an inspiring journey as a founder with an immigrant background. Mengting, it's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So, Mengting, you were born in China and later moved to Germany, where you built Kitchen Stories that internationally was very successful and is still very successful. Can you maybe tell us what were your biggest challenges you faced after your immigration, and how much was that a factor, a driving force for your success?
Well, that's a big question. I think honestly that my background coming from China, I came to Germany when I was really young, so I was 4 years old. I think maybe the biggest challenge was in the beginning of my life, that when I came, I did not speak a single word of German, so I couldn't understand anything. But as a child, it works out. I learned the language pretty fast, and in a way, I guess it made me quite resilient, and having those possibilities and understanding that if I try and learn and do, I can make things happen. I think that's a big sort of part of my personality, that I like to believe that hard work will always get you the right payout. Of course, there is a lot of, luck and timing and all of these things involved, but I am a very firm believer of working hard. And how did it, I don't know, inspire me to do Kitchen Stories, or, how did I get there with that background? I think it's really more an accident. I think going to WHU as a university is probably the biggest factor of starting a company, because only there I got to know all of the founders and their stories, and that was very, very inspiring. And my parents sent me there because they're Chinese, and they saw this on TV, and I thought that's a pretty good opportunity in my life. I don't think otherwise that I would have ended up there. I don't think I see it as such a major challenge during Kitchen Stories, or, that was a thing, but it influenced many things that we did. Like, we internationalized into the Chinese market super early on. And why did we do that? We started very bootstrapped, so we had very little money, but then my mom, she translated all of the content for us. She wrote all of the recipes in Chinese and everything. It was just like a market that was there. And so we could just go there with basically no cost at all. So that probably helped us to gain pretty early on a significant amount of users in the Chinese market, purely because that's sort of my background. Yeah.
And of course, Chinese food is amazing. So was there ever a moment where you felt like an outsider in the German startup scene? How did you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, outsider, I always try to look at it, I guess, from the positive angle of having something that's sort of unique. Of course, I was often the only female in the room, the only female with an immigration background, for sure. It's like tick, tick, tick. There are so many of these things that make themselves great on any application, to be honest. I think these days it's more a door opener. It wasn't as much back then. It was also already a little bit of something, because there was something special and unique about it, that made it maybe also easier, to get appointments with VCs and all of these kind of things, which I think today is also still very true. I think what I really did not enjoy too much was that in my professional career, I had a lot to do with sort of, German, small and mid-cap sort of classic, very traditional companies, great companies, led by great people. But for them, I think it was even more weird, coming from, a 23-year-old Chinese immigrant. And there was a lot of questions about sort of, oh, where you from? And like, oh, your German is so great. And like all of these like very typical things happening. I took it more, like as a compliment, I guess, but it has always been an issue to get this, I think, first amount of trust, which I do think is also a lot due to age and these things. They've been doing their jobs for like 40, 50 years, and someone comes in, has been doing a job for like 4 months and is trying to tell them that the industry is changing into a different direction, which of course they have a lot of question marks, but I think it also helped us to get into some interesting conversations after all.
Mengting, you just talked about your mother translating the text. I find this is such a beautiful and unique story, also a story of support. How did you start Kitchen Stories back then? So what was the initial idea? What was the initial situation that happened? You started Kitchen Stories with a co-founder as well. How did you guys meet? And what was the dynamic there?
Yeah, we met in university, and I really had the ambition to start a company on my own. I really wanted to make that happen. It didn't really have a great idea, to be honest. And then we thought we would open a sort of Tex-Mex food chain, something like Vapiano, but like for Mexican food, sort of. And that's how we moved to Berlin and looked at the things. You can imagine my parents, they were like, okay, sending my child to this school, and then afterwards she wants to open a restaurant. It's like the worst nightmare ever. But yeah, we knew some friends from university. They opened a doner kebab chain back then in the States. And we thought it's similar. We don't have that many Mexican immigrants. They don't have that many Turkish, but ultimately the cuisines are sort of pretty much in line with regards to taste and all of these things. And spend like, I don't know, 2 or 3 months during our master thesis in Berlin, trying to figure out how to build a store, how to find a location, build up a restaurant, and then decided maybe that was not the greatest initial idea ever. So we went back to the drawing board and we did it more the way we learned in school, right? So we made a huge Excel sheet. We looked at different companies, their exits, their fundings, how were they doing in other countries, were the things that we could do in Germany that weren't really available yet. And ultimately, the only thing that we were always really interested in was something that had to do with food. And it never ended up being on the top of the list with regards to like the business model and these things. But I was really in love with food. I used to watch cooking shows like all my life when I was a child. I just loved that type of content. And the iPod was a new device, was the first generation of the iPad. And I love digital products. And so ultimately, there was very little available at the time with regards to foods. Everything was still in scanned PDFs, very old school sort of magazines turned into apps. And so we saw an opportunity to really build something that could become the best in its industry. And I think this is the naive view that's also necessary to build a great company, is to really know that what you're building is actually so much better or can be number one in its market, and can be the best product for the consumer. So yeah, that's how we sort of ultimately ended up just doing that and figuring that we could build something maybe like this and convince a lot of users to us.
So I think it has a lot to do with having the right idea at the right time, especially if you say back then there wasn't anything like it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also like trusting your gut a little bit. I mean, we went more with our passion than I think what looked best in Excel. We didn't pick like the most promising business model. I mean, there's also like a lot of merits of picking just the best business model. But it was just not sort of our approach, not something that I think I would have had enough grit and resilience on if I was only sort of interested in the model. I was very interested in the product itself. I was my own user, loved the industry.
Coming back to your family, you went directly after your studies from the WU to Berlin to build kitchen stories. How did they deal with it?
I think they were hoping that it was a phase that would pass quickly. I mean, I know my parents were anxious, I would say the least. My parents came literally from nothing when they came to Germany, and I think sending me to that school was a huge thing for them, also financially. And so, of course, their wish was for me to, join a big company, a big name, have a safe and secure job that would earn me enough money and just give me a stable lifestyle. That was their goal. When they figured I wanted to start something on my own, they were not super amused, but they were supportive. But I think in their mind, they were supportive for a while because they hoped then in the end I would see myself that it's not really, going to be what I'm doing. That changed luckily, and they were very supportive throughout. I mean, I had no money, so they have to lend me the 12,500 euros for 50% of the GmbH to start, which they did. So they supported me throughout. They would let me know a little bit that they think it's a crazy thing to do. But nonetheless, I mean, ultimately, we were lucky, I guess, that it worked out well. And so they were happy, but it was hard, I think, for them.
So, let's talk about that. What were maybe the 3 biggest challenges you faced building the kitchen stories?
I mean, there's so many. The biggest, I don't know, in the beginning, I think funding, right? So 2 girls coming from university, not knowing how to code, not knowing how to cook, have never done a video shoot or a photo shoot before in our lives. That's pretty tough. Like telling people that we would be the ones that would build an app like that could, change that industry. And so many people I had a lot of meetings, but they were like, look, this is nice, but maybe, not the right fit for us. And so it was very tough to convince people to fund us. So we built it very bootstrapped. We got the 25,000 from our parents, and then we raised another 15,000 from friends. So with that money, we built our first version and everything, and we reached our first, almost 1 million users before we got our seed investment. So yeah, I think that was the very tough thing in the beginning. Then the second one, I think the second biggest one, even until the end, is the topic of monetization in this mobile app environment. Honestly, when we started, there was this huge wave of mobile startups. Everyone thought, this is going to be the next big thing. And so also us, we got also influenced by, I don't know, this whole market, everyone talking about users. So we placed monetization far down the line. I think these days it's very different. And you got to prove that you have a true model in order to scale. When we started, everyone was only interested in our user growth. And I think that became a very big challenge for us down the line of like how to actually monetize all of these users, even though we had them. So I think this was maybe the second biggest thing. The third thing in terms of challenges, I think, was probably handling a fully international business as like 23, 24-year-olds running from Berlin and being available in the whole world. And we had to we scaled this suddenly, with a click of a button, you were available in basically every country that Apple is available in. But really handling that, managing that, building communities, all of that, we underestimated it, I would say, at least. And we had to scale back a lot, so we had to also we hired people, but we also had to fire a lot of people. We needed to like focus on our core markets and all of that. So I think this international expansion and then reverting back to focus markets, that was probably also one of the major things along the line.
You mentioned that funding was one of the biggest challenges. You started the startup in the rocket era and also in their industry, I will say, e-commerce, online platforms. Did you talk to them, and why was funding one of the biggest challenges there?
I had a lot of respect for the Rocket people. I knew a lot of friends who were working there naturally and knew their story. I met with Alexander Zandnia at the time, talking about the business. But honestly, as with any other person, I talked about this before we actually had a product in hand, was like, you're not going to make it, sort of. I think everyone was waiting to see an actual product. And when we had the product, even then it was really tough. To do the first round was very tough because no one really knew how to monetize this or if it could actually become that big. And so it wasn't never like a very obvious VC case from the beginning. And so we had to convince our first angels first. And honestly, we just sat there and every night we took this like little red book from WHO, which back then didn't even have, I think, a digital version, to be honest. It was literally just a book. And so every night after 8 p.m., we would just sit there and call up random people from the industry and just asking them for advice. We didn't really ask them to invest, but we asked them if, like, for example, like people in the media business, if they see a potential there and what they deem would be great, people from the food industry. So yeah, we just had to randomly do that. We didn't have a network, and the network itself that we had, even though through the people that we knew in Berlin and in the industry, you have to imagine that that whole network was so much smaller back then than nowadays. I mean, it's been like more than 10 years ago. So there were much fewer people involved and also much fewer angels involved because there were only little people who had exits already and who could reinvest their money. That was not a big thing. So it was really also convincing people who, made their money classic in like consulting firms or banking or whatever, but just had to sort of a little bit of free cash flow that they could invest in a startup. And there wasn't that much expertise yet in the field. And so it was tougher, I would say, because it wasn't as easy to reach a lot of potential investors at once.
Previous to that, you were interning at Deutsche Bank and BCG, which are leading firms and actually huge names on the CV. But you mentioned that network was one of the challenges you had. Do you think interning at startups or VCs could be better for aspiring entrepreneurs and just for the network? How do you think about it?
Well, I think the most valuable in interning with startups is to understand the work mode and to figure out if sort of that's your jam. I think it's like one of the best opportunities to figure out if you actually do want to become an entrepreneur yourself or not. I mean, I did all of that because I still needed to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I find that back then, I mean, investment banking and consulting, that was just a thing. I don't know, maybe it's still like this for part of the people, for sure. But honestly, startup was not really a big thing. I mean, it was when I started at the university, Zalando was founded. So it only then started to become more of a thing, to go into the startup scene. And I did 2 internships with startups, and I just like fell in love with this vibe, how people worked, like this amount of responsibility, the amount of things that you could decide on your own and shape and like pick the people you want to work with. I think that was a big thing. With regards to network, sure. I mean, I do think you meet more people that are already in the scene. So through them, you can build a network that's closer to the core of the people probably that you need. in comparison to working somewhere else. Do I think it gives you such a big head start? Like, I don't know. I mean, there are so many startups these days that are hiring from the best consultancies, and you can jump over very quickly as well, right? I think in networking, it's really about sort of very consciously building it, figuring out who you want to talk to and figure your way through, because from one person to the next, you will always find a way to talk to that person that you're looking for. But really, like, being unstoppable in terms of like trying again and again and over again. Your startup might give you an initial start. But is that everything? No, I don't know, because I mean, depends. If the startup is pretty new, then you know the founders. Through that, those founders, you might know their investors. But that's, I mean, ultimately a handful of people, right? So I don't know if that, I would put that at the most decisive factor.
Mengting, so how did back then the very first days look like at Kitchen Stories when you had your seed investment? You hired people probably. How did these days look like? Were they exciting? Were they stressful?
Yeah, all of it, I think. So because we didn't really have great funding. So we started out of our apartment. We worked in our apartment day and night. We worked together. We lived together. It was also a lot. Like seeing another person 24/7 is also much. You know, in the very beginning, you don't feel it, but then after like a year or so, you start to feel it probably. And it was a lot of like up and downs. We couldn't really afford to hire anyone in the beginning. So we got a student developer. He worked for us like a day a week probably. And it was like as much as we could afford at the time. It was a lot of fake it till you make it. So we would always have our interviews, for example, in Berlin here in the cafe at Rosenthaler Platz, because we would just like tell people our office is close by, but of course we didn't have one. So it was a lot of that, right? Like there is definitely a lot of pretending you're bigger than you actually are involved in order to even get through the door. Yeah. Then finding friends who already maybe had companies that allowed us then to sit there at their desks in their offices to make it look a little more professional when we had meetings and stuff. Yeah, it was a lot of, I don't know, I used to call it like Jugendforsch. So it's a bit like a project. I don't know. It doesn't feel so real in a sense. It's very, very weird in the beginning, I think, because you're doing a lot. You're working for the first time. You're working just for yourself. And everything is sort of just dependent on you. It's a pretty cool feeling out.
So maybe an interesting point to mention is you mentioned that you live together with your co-founder Verena Hubertz, who is now the vice president, I guess, of the Social Democratic Party in Germany and member of the Bundestag. Did you ever thought that she will to politics and make politics back then?
I think I guess not when we started. No. Then back then we didn't think so. I think between the both of us, sure, I was always more the driving force for the startup industry. I don't think that she would have gone into that industry necessarily herself. But she was always interested in politics. So I think after a couple of years, this was already something that came to her interest for sure.
So every online application struggles with getting early traction. You got that very fast. How did you create those network effects? And in the beginning, maybe what were the key strategies that helped you gain users and build momentum?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is something that I've been asked so often, and I don't have a great answer to it, to be honest, because it's not that we sat there and we decided this is going to be our marketing strategy and then we did it. You know, we planned a little bit of budget for marketing. We end up never using it. We've never spent a single euro in acquiring installs. We never had to really, but it would have also not been a great idea because we didn't necessarily monetize the user directly. So why it happened, and even though that might be the boring answer, it's just that people love to cook with our product. Like they used it and they told people about it. So at the core, I'm still a very firm believer that if you build a product that's that good and that serves the need, you will become big through the product itself. And we got really lucky also, like, again, like timing and luck is always part of the equation. So we got very lucky that we just got discovered by Apple in our first review process already. And we had a feature from them back then. The features were also much more significant for a single application because the App Store was not customized like these days. Like everyone has their own App Store basically on their phone, depending on their preferences. Back then, there was one App Store for everyone. And so when you got featured in a certain country, you got really a lot of exposure. And so we got featured in the German-speaking market already, I don't know, like probably 1 or 2 months after we like launched without even telling anyone we launched. And so suddenly we had our first 50, 60,000 installs probably within a couple of days. And then we could build from there. And so then over the years, our marketing spendings where a lot of it was our relationship with Apple. So we always tried to build the product in a way that it would also fit the new OS releases from Apple, to fit the new devices, to always make it work with the new features also that they were planning to promote. And so our investment was sort of investing also in that relationship that they would continue to promote us. You know, we were on all of the devices and all of the app stores globally. So whenever you went into a store, you would always also find our app as one of the demo applications and stuff. We got to go to San Francisco and build the very first watch apps before it was released. And so that was a lot of our marketing channel, I would say, that we were able to do that and to focus on that as a huge part of our product building.
And did you always have the vision for the app? If you think back about the very first vision for Kitchen Stories, do you think you basically cracked that code and the vision you had in mind was visualized? Or did it become even more than that? Did it move towards an even bigger picture?
Both. I would say definitely with regards to how big it became in terms of usage, I could have never imagined. If you asked me back then, you know, we had a very simple thought when we started with this little money. We just thought, look, there's apps that cost like $2.99, and if they have, 100,000 downloads, and that's already pretty good for us. We never thought that it would actually have the potential to become this big. I think in the beginning, of course, we hoped for it, but did I actually think this would happen within like a year or so? No, I did not. On the other hand, like, if you ask me about, is that the vision of the product that I reached? No, I had like so many more visions, hopes, and dreams for that product that I wanted to build that I didn't get around building. That there's like plenty of other things I would have loved to do with it that just like based on, strategy and time and budget and all of these constraints couldn't happen. So I would think it's both. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you were focusing on serving the need and focusing on the product, and often founders, especially for the first time when they start an online application, they underestimate design. And I will say Kitchen Story as a really great design. But did you consider design and the great design from the beginning? And how do you think founders can really create value or gain a competitive advantage to others with design? So can you share a bit about design and how you approach it?
Yeah. I think usability is a huge part, especially in mobile applications. I mean, honestly, people spend like 3 seconds looking at your app, and if they don't get it, they leave. And there are people who download it and never even open it. So I think you have to make it really simple for people to get it. And for me, as someone, I love product. Like even I had no clue about product, and still for the first version and many versions after, I was always the one who like I wireframed everything myself, like with pen and paper and stuff. I have no clue. Like even today, if you ask me, I cannot do like fancy designs. But I can think about the functionality in every single step and where to place things and figure out if that's something that's intuitive or not. We also focused a lot on making it very native to the platform itself so that it felt very at ease. And I think what really set us apart is that like focusing on what this product is good for. Like what was our ultimate goal? Our ultimate goal was not to have a huge number of active users. Our ultimate goal was that people had to cook with it and it had to work. And so for cooking with an application, there were very simple things that we provided that others didn't. Like, for example, you could see in every step of the recipe, there were the exact amount of ingredients and utensils that you needed. And if you scaled up the recipe, it would change in every step, because how often do you bake the muffins and you want to double the amount, but then you have to calculate yourself, and how much is it? And like all of these things. So it was very, tiny things that we changed or provided as features that were not available before, but they were hugely helpful for people to actually have a successful cooking experience with it. And I think this is what I would provide as a suggestion, is to always think about like what is that core activity that user is supposed to do, and is it like for that purpose really, really good? And also maybe that's counterintuitive, but I'm not a huge fan of this whole like make it lean and test everything. And there is a certain truth to it for sure. I believe in testing when it's about small things, like putting the button left or right, in which color should it be, all of these things. You can do great A/B testing with things like that. But I don't really believe in it for like whole features or whole experiences. And for that, I think you need to build it, there needs to be a vision behind it. You just got to decide and you just got to go for it. You can optimize things with testing. Do I really believe in you can figure out a whole product based on that? I don't know. I think it's great that some people can, but I think with lifestyle products, not necessarily. As you said, like often people don't really put a lot of like focus on design, and maybe that's okay for things that a user is like that they have to do. They have to figure their way out. Then fine, but if they have like 100 different options to choose from, then maybe they just choose what looks nice.
I feel like that totally makes sense, because you just mentioned that figuring it out and loving the small details about the product itself is so important, and was so important from the very beginning to you. That reminds me a lot about the Apple vision back then, when Jobs talks about how he started the whole how he started Apple, why Apple became successful while there were 1,000 other competitors. It's because he had this love for the detail. And I feel like you have that, and you started with this love for the detail at the very, very beginning of Kitchen Stories. And this is what made it successful ultimately. From the small designs from the wireframes that you did, to calling people up in the evening, all of these things really show that you care.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would hope so. I would hope so.
So I want to ask you something which is maybe cliche. At least I don't know whether there are any studies backing that. So do you think women are better in considering design and having an eye for it?
I mean, no, I wouldn't say necessarily, because I worked with a lot of people who had like a great eye for design. They were male. Maybe that's also like an important thing I did not mention, is that because you asked like sort of especially like what can the founder contribute, and I think a big part of it is also to like trust the people who do their job really, really great, And again, like I'm not the one who can create the actual design. Like my Figma skills are like basic. Um, but I was lucky enough to work together with designers that could make this vision come to life, and trusting them that they make the design work ultimately. And I think we always had this magical triangle between sort of development, design, and product. And the three of us, we were always on eye level, and each person like contributed like their sort of expertise, and we discussed things, but ultimately always then that person was able to have the final say in their aspect. And I think that that is a huge part also of design, to trust in those abilities and to pick the people that have sort of a bit like the same taste, right? It's not like, yeah, there's not a magical thing behind it. There's nothing like formal about it. It's really like sometimes you have the same taste and it works great, and sometimes you don't, and then it looks awkward and wobbly, and like you have to discuss about everything. I worked with a lot of amazing female designers along the line, as well. So I don't know with regards to design if it really makes a difference. They're just like, I think there are really like two types of people. There are the people who are really into this stuff that love to discuss about the single last pixel that is wrong, and that's me. And then there are people who like, I don't even see the difference. Like, whatever, just pick A or B. I just couldn't care less. And I think they have a huge benefit too in other aspects, right? Because sometimes you just have to like also just leave it. Like it doesn't make a difference. It's true. But yeah, no, I don't know. I don't think an eye for design is gender relevant. Not that I've experienced, I would say.
Was there always this? What I love about Kitchen Stories is the food editors that you have in the app. Was there always this vision that the team itself, the Kitchen Stories team itself, becomes such an important part of the whole company? Or was the vision, let's say, that it's more focused on the community itself, creating content and spreading the content?
Yeah. No, that was actually something that developed over time. I think in the beginning, we thought we would do it like faceless, sort of completely faceless. There were like a lot of videos and instructions, but you could only see the hands sort of doing things. And part of the big reasoning for that was that we wanted this to be global and international, and we didn't want to be attached to a face to do that, because faces, you know it, right? Like in every country, it's different if they find that great or bad, and there's a language barrier and all of these things. So we didn't focus solely on the food, and we were able to internationalize that very easily. But it's also, I mean, hard to imagine that when we started, there was almost no such thing as an influencer. I mean, there were blogs, but an influencer, like today we understand an influencer to be, that was not really a big thing. And over time, we understood that we had to have faces and to be relatable and have and tell our own stories in order to be significant as a brand, because that's just what people suddenly wanted to see and hear, also when it came to food. And so we started to do that, and we were very lucky that we had a very great international crowd of editors who, honestly, today a lot of them are doing their own thing, you know, influencing through their food, which is amazing to see. And we were lucky that we were able to build on their competencies. But for all of us, including them and us, it was a very new thing. And I think if you ask me today, I think we started it way too late. We should have started it much sooner. But for a long time, I think we were too scared to combine that brand with faces and to attach them so close to faces that you almost feel like, what happens if they leave? Like, what happens with your brand if that face is not there anymore? Yeah, if I could redo it, I would have probably done it sooner.
How was it in the beginning? I talked to the founders of Know Unity. For those who know what Know Unity is, it's a learning platform on which students can find summaries from other students. Said they, in every country they launch their platform, they have to have at least 1,000 summaries uploaded. How was it for you?
how much content we needed.
Yeah, to start.
I mean, we started with 100 recipes. That was all for a long time. And in the beginning, we shoot it down twice a year. So probably we added 100 recipes per year, because we always had to do 50 videos. And it's hard to imagine, like back then, a video production also, like there was not like, let's do a video production with our phones or something. That was just not existent. You have to have like actual cameras and lighting and like all of these things. It was so much more work. But yeah, I mean, we were a small team and that was all we needed. I think today, not a chance. Like you have to create content basically every day. It depends, of course, in which industry you are. It's very different. But like with this kind of like entertainment forms, and becoming big on social media, it's tough. I mean, you basically have to produce content every day.
And Mengting, after your kitchen stories time, so you successfully built up kitchen stories, and after 9 years, you left the company. What industries were then interesting to you, or are now interesting to you? What are you doing now? What do you want to do in the future? Do you want to stay in the food industry?
I took some time off, did the whole world travel thing. I had 2 kids. So, did took some time off, but I think I will always like want to create something. I think building a company, that's just like in my DNA, sort of. I really love doing it. I also love this initial feel of it. I started something more like a heartfelt project, I would say, with a friend together also. We used to study together, but she became a doctor afterwards. She's a radiologist. And we were looking a lot into preventive medicine. But ultimately started now with the small project that, again, similar to the last time, it's just a personal issue that I encountered because my kids are like almost 2 and 4.5. And, you don't have them yet. And it's still maybe some time away, but they get sick like all the time. And there's a lot of like kids' diseases that they just have to go through. And for parents, and especially new parents, it can be very hard. It's a very hard time to see them suffer through. And since most of us, we don't really live with our parents anymore, very similar to cooking, honestly, you don't really get that knowledge anymore. It's like hard for parents to judge if it's something terrible or not, to be honest. And this experience of going to the pediatrician when your child is sick is the worst. Like you don't have an appointment. You go there, you have to sit there for an hour. Your child is crying. Everyone else is crying. You feel like your kid is getting like 100 other diseases at the same time while you're there. So we spoke with a lot of pediatricians, and they told us 80 to 90% of people who are coming based on an acute situation do not have to come. And that's how we got inspired to create something that would sort of empower and inform parents and provide them with the tools that they need to really take care of their sick kids without having like so much stress. Because there's little good information, little good content available. Everything very much like in food. You always end up on some page, but it has like a ton of advertising. It's hard to get through. And so we created an application for that. So it's about kids' health and kids' diseases. You can look up all of the diseases. There's a symptom journal. You can track the journal, track the symptoms, send a report to your doctor, share the information. You can digitize all of your documentation on like vaccinations and stuff. You'll get the reminders on when to go to your regular medical checkups and all of these things, which we do believe is helpful in preventive care, because if you know what you had back then as a child, it's sometimes easier to figure out what you're having afterwards. It also comes with a physical product. So there's sort of like a first aid kit, but better. So it's not just first aid. It also has diagnostics in there with like rapid tests, or worm tests and diagnostics kits and stuff. And it helps with every kind of sickness that they have, not just when they, injured their arm or something, or have a wound. So yeah, that's a little project we started. Again, it's very young. We only just started. It only went live like a month ago. We haven't even promoted it at all yet. And let's see where it's going. It's called Leni's Lab. So for everyone who knows everyone who has a kid, go and check it out.
Really nice. And I love the way you pitch it. I mean, I'm sold.
That sounds good. That sounds good. Yeah, I hope we can get to a lot of parts of it. But nowadays it's not so easy to gain traction. There is new secrets to be uncovered on how to gain initial traction.
That reminded me on an app which a friend of mine built, and I think Nour, they just won the startup teens in your cohort 2022. That was also a first aid app calling themselves the STF app.
That's
and
cool.
he told me that they quit it. They stopped working on it because of regulatory challenges. How is it? Is it
Yeah,
correct?
I get that. It's terrible. I mean, honestly, I also didn't think it would be this hard, to be honest. But we spend from the money that we put in, we spend probably a third on legal aid, which is insane. And there's a lot of issues. It's very tough. I think you just got to know, or like how much can you still push the boundary until it's not the gray zone anymore. And yeah, it takes a lot of legal effort and good consultants, and that means it's very costly. It's also definitely a huge issue that we're seeing, which is super annoying because you want to build, just like great solutions, and you can't. And ChatGPT can. And let me tell you why they can, because they're not there to give you medical advice. That's a very great legal reason, because it's not obvious that it's being used for medical use cases. It's allowed to do anything because it's available for everything. Yeah, so there's a lot of these things. Yeah, because also, of course, like the best case would be that you don't just track your symptoms, but you get the diagnosis right away, or at least a suggestion of what it could be. And especially with children, it's easier sort of to suggest diseases that come at a certain age, in a certain season or whatever. It's just a little bit easier because it's just happens to everyone. Yeah, but it's tough. I understand. That they figure, especially in your first venture, you figure there must be things that are easier done than this. I think so. Yeah, I agree.
So back then, just the remaining question from Kitchen Stories, and also something about now. So you're now an investor yourself, and you began back then without a founder market fit, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
How important is founder market fit now, especially in the food space? How do you think about it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, of course, with a certain experience now, I look much more at things like the market, for example, which after when I started, I didn't care. I was like, everyone needs to eat, so it's gonna be okay. But now, of course, I know better, I guess, what has a market and what not. But honestly, I'm not a very rational investor. I don't think many people are. Ultimately, investing is so much more of an emotional choice than anything else, because you just don't know. So for me, the much more decisive part are the people behind it. So I look at their drive and their grit. I think this is what inspires me the most. It's also why I invest. I don't really invest because I think it's a sound financial choice. It's not. Like, just go and invest in MSCI and you'll be better off than doing startup investments. If you do a lot of startup investments, okay. But if you're like me and you just do like a very few selected ones, probabilities are very high. It's going to become very negative investment. But I just love to work with the young founders, who have this drive, who want it no matter what. And I think those people, like a lot of them, they always find a way. In very few cases, it ends up to be whatever they wanted it to be in the beginning. But the people who are very resilient, they always find a different way to pivot and do it. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a topic that is super interesting to me, where I can understand the use case and I can see the problem. I can understand that a lot of people have the problem. And I look at that person, and I get a sense of whether they are so willing to find a solution that they will always find a way to do it. And yeah, I think that's what I look out for the most.
Okay. I want you to give those people who want to approach you as an investor an advice. Let's connect it with your story and fundraising. So later, very large investors, very famous investors like Cherry Ventures invested in Kitchen Stories. How did you convince them, and how should startup founders convince you? What are you looking for?
I mean, Cherry, honestly, that was a network thing. Everyone's from WHU. It was just like, we were very close to closing the round, and they basically were like, yeah, let's join last minute. So to convince investors, I think, for one, you need a good introduction. Find someone who knows them well and be introduced. Do not try to cold call them or just send a pitch deck. I think it's the first way to show that you're capable, to find someone who knows them, because they know a lot of people. And so I think that's a good way to do it. Then the second one, I think, is to just really know your numbers well. I mean, I've had many people pitching, and they had no real clue about their own numbers. I mean, it's sort of hard to imagine, maybe, but I think it's underestimated by a lot of people, that I need to understand that you have a certain business sense behind this, and that you are able to discuss this, and to discuss also what happens when it doesn't go well, like all of these things. Yeah. And other than that, I think a lot of it, especially with angels, it's really more an emotional thing. So you got to find the people who really understand your problem. Like, figure out who you need to talk to that will understand your problem. And as with every kind of sales process, it's about the numbers. The more people you talk to, the more likely it is you find someone to say yes. Do not be discouraged by the first 5 no's. You will probably get 20 or 30 no's before you get the first yes. It's just how life works. And so, yeah, I think you just also have to talk to a lot of people.
Mengting, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for all the very valuable tips. Coming to an end now, what would you say are the most important skills that helped you become who you are now?
Most important skills, I think, looking for an alternative solution. I think this is maybe also one of the things that I provide most often as a feedback to part of my team, is to, I understand the problem. If someone comes to me and it's like, oh, this and this is not working, it's like, okay, I understand the problem, but what do we do now? Like, think in terms of scenarios and alternatives and solutions. Think about, we could do this and this would happen, or we could do this, then that would happen, or we could do that, and then figure out sort of what is the best alternative to pick from, and not be sort of so set in stone in like, this is the problem. Like, I don't know. I think it's just like this, to understand that there is always a different way to go about it. This is maybe something that I think has helped me the most. And just be kind to people. With regards to building networks, getting to know people, building products, talking to your suppliers, talking to your team, just be a kind person. Like, don't screw them up. Like, don't fake it. Don't be unauthentic. Just, be a kind person. I think that gets you pretty far as well.
I think, thank you so much for sharing your incredible journey also from my side. From Kitchen Stories to Leni's Lab, and beyond. Wishing you all the success with Leni's lab and in your personal life. And I can't wait to see what's next.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank you
very
so
much.
much. Oh, if everyone's looking for an internship, I need an intern for Leni's Lab, so let me know.
So please reach out to Mengting.
Feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not the greatest replier, I have to be honest, but you can find me there. It's a good opportunity.
Nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.